Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on this Friday afternoon in the fall. We're so glad you could be with us today for webinar 3 of our 4-part webinar series on the Teacher Data Use Survey. Today we're focusing on administering the survey itself. And no worries if you weren't able to join us for the first or second webinar. We'll be speaking briefly about key points from those. As Jennifer said, I'm Stephanie Wilkerson. I'm president of Magnolia Consulting, and I'm also a team member with REL Appalachia. I've been with them for the past 4 years, and for the past 3 years, I've had the privilege of working with educators in Metro Nashville Public Schools, where we have been working to build capacity to create a culture of data use through collaborative inquiry. And when we first started this partnership 3 years ago, one of my main questions was, are you using data? Everyone was like, yes. I was like, how do you know? They're like, well, we really don't. There's no evidence for how teachers are using data. And it was really that point right there, that need, that gave rise to bringing the Teacher Data Use Survey to life. And so for that, we really value that educators in Metro Nashville had a role and input into this survey to make sure that it's relevant and appropriate for practitioner use. I'm joined today by Jeff Wayman, president of Wayman Services. He'll introduce himself in a minute, but I also wanted to recognize our 3 other co-authors on the Teacher Data Use Survey, and they are Vincent Cho with Boston College, Ellen Mandanock with West Ed, and John Sapovitz with the University of Pennsylvania. I mentioned that this work is through the Regional Education Laboratory Appalachia. We serve educators in Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia. The contract is administered through the U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Education Sciences. And what we do is we respond to the needs of educators in the region in a variety of topic areas, ranging from college and career readiness to effective data use. And we do that through conducting practitioner-friendly research, offering various workshops, webinars, and other forms of technical assistance. We would love to have you help us get the word out about the Teacher Data Use Survey as well as this webinar today. We still have one more webinar, so if you would like to take the time to tweet during this event, please do so. Share with folks in your network what you're learning and help them learn and be aware of the Teacher Data Use Survey, and let them know that they are welcome to join us next Friday for our following, our last webinar. So you'll see under the poll questions on the right-hand side of your screen, there are 3 of them. If you would take the time to answer them. The first one is, what is your role? The second one, we want to know if you have seen the first webinar. The third one, have you seen the second webinar? Again, it's okay if you haven't. It just gives us an idea of who you are today. And then our fourth question, I think it's a little ambitious. Have you administered this survey? Perhaps you have. It's only been out for, I think, about 3 weeks and available. But we do know that some of you might be very excited about it and are already getting it up and ready to go. Just a couple more seconds, and then we'll see the results from our poll. Okay. So it looks like we have a variety of people coming from the district and from schools, an instructional coach, district level administrators, some that fall into a different category there, perhaps researchers with universities. We do have, most of you have not participated in the past webinars, which is just fine. We'll bring you up to speed on some key points today with that. And we do have somebody who's administered the survey. Yay, that's awesome. So feel free during our questions session to share anything, questions that have come up for you, or what your experience has been. And then for those of you who haven't, we certainly hope that that is in your plans for the future. All right, so as I said, this is the third in our 4-part series. Next week, we'll be talking about communicating results from the survey. That's on November 4th, and I'll be speaking a little bit more about that at the end of today's webinar series. Today, we're really focusing on helping to build your understanding of how to administer the survey and of possible analyses that you can run for the survey. Jeff will begin by providing some key points from webinars 1 and 2. He'll refer to the survey guide, which is the companion to the 3 versions of the survey. He'll talk a little bit about survey administration, analyses of survey responses, and you'll have a couple of opportunities to submit your questions in the question box. So please have those ready and don't hesitate. If you haven't accessed the survey and guide before, there's a link here, and we'll also put a link in the chat box. When you click on that link, you'll see access to the 3 versions of the survey as well as the guide. You'll also see a report template that we created, which is an Excel database that allows you to enter data from the 3 surveys, and it generates a dashboard report with graphic displays as well as a narrative word report with the same graphic displays. So you'll see a sample dashboard report to get a feel for what that might look like. This is a great way to be able to synthesize data, have a look at it in bar charts that represent findings from all 3 versions. That certainly supports data interpretation and making recommendations for moving forward with findings. With no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Wayman.
Stephanie, thank you. Hi, everybody. I am Jeff Wayman, as Stephanie said. I've been researching data use for the last 15 years, first at Johns Hopkins University and then at the University of Texas, and in my present role as a consultant for the last 3 years. I was fortunate enough to lead this research team that built the Teacher Data Use Survey. Stephanie listed our co-authors, and we are excited about this, and we think it's good work, and we're glad that you all are joining us today. So, you know, in my research on data use, I've written a lot that data use lives and dies in the principal's office. And one of the big reasons why that's true is that principals are responsible for getting faculties on board in using data. And I can tell you that you won't have an effective or healthy data initiative if you don't have all your faculty on board. This falls to the principal. But as Stephanie alluded to, we do this funny thing in education. We tell teachers, we say, use data, be evidence-based. Yet, the evidence and data that we have on how they use data and what they think about data is almost always purely anecdotal. It's almost always known by leaders because of the teachers they know or the things that they hear. And so we wanted to establish a better way to create a better evidence base around teacher data use. And so that's what the 5 of us did with this teacher data use survey. It can be a real help for leaders or researchers who want to know what teachers think about data, how they're using it, which ones they use the most frequently, and so on. In doing so, we created 3 versions of the Teacher Data Use Survey. Now, of course, there's a teacher version where we ask teachers how they use data, but we also wanted to make an administrator version and a version for instructional support staff, so like instructional coaches or data coaches that support teachers, because those are important perspectives on teacher data use also. And if you administer all 3 versions, you get a triangulated look at teacher data use. You don't just depend on one role. The surveys all ask the same questions. They're just worded appropriate to an administrator or an instructional support staff. And you see a few examples here on the screen. The teacher would be asked, are the following forms of data available to you? The administrator would be asked, are the following forms of data available to your teachers? And a data coach would be asked about the teachers you support. So in creating this survey, we made sure it was research-based. And what we did is we sat down first, and the 5 of us talked about, okay, what does the research tell us about how teacher data use works, and how do we interpret that? What you see on your screen here is our interpretation of the research. We see teacher data use as guided by a number of actions that teachers take with data, and those actions often follow some form of a data use cycle. That's what you see in the middle here. And we posited that if a teacher were to take consistent actions and do it in the right way, that they would improve their own knowledge and improve their own practice. And if that's happening in the classroom, then students should learn better. But here is where the field has failed, to my thinking thus far. The field has thrown this at teachers and said, here, take actions with data, and then gone away. In reality, the research tells us that these actions that teachers take with data are supported by a number of different things, and that's what you see on the left there, those bubbles on the left. Things like competence, their attitudes, collaboration, organizational support such as computer data systems or leadership, things like that. And so when we created this survey, we said, okay, we are going to measure these things in this framework that are important to teacher data use. Now, that means that we didn't measure teacher knowledge and practice, and we didn't measure student learning. Those are measured in other things, and those are not directly to do with data use. What we did is we measured the things that dealt with data use, and that's the actions and the bubbles on the left. In administering the teacher data use, you have to customize it, and that's one of the things that we really like about this survey. The other surveys that we were aware of and the ones that we had written on our own, the 5 of us, typically dealt with data in a generic form. So you might ask a teacher about, what do you do with data? Well, the truth is that the answer to that question is different depending on what data form you're talking about. If you ask a teacher what you do with state data, you're going to get different answers than if you ask a teacher what do you do with periodic benchmarks or with your own tests and quizzes. And the TDUS allows you, it requires you to customize to that end. So what happens in the TDUS is there are a couple of blocks of questions where you have, the district or school has to identify specific forms of data. You name them, you say what they are, and you ask teachers specifically about their uses of those forms of data. To help you along, we ask that these specific forms of data come from 4 categories, and they're listed here: state data, periodic data, local data, and personal data. State data is like the state test. Periodic data is like our interim benchmark assessments that are given periodically throughout the year. Local data are things that are written at the school or district level, sometimes at the team level, and those could be periodic also. Personal data is like tests, quizzes, and all of the other stuff that teachers create on their own. But the idea is that we want the TDUS to be something that relates to your own context. And we want it to be something that when your teachers and your administrators and your coaches look at this, that they're like, oh yeah, I know what the map is, or I know what the STAR test is, or I know what my tests and quizzes are, things like that. So that gives you a very brief overview of our first 2 webinars. I can tell you that that these first 2 webinars, if you miss them, like Stephanie said, you're still good for this webinar here, but if you want to go back and hear more detail about the things I just talked about, the first webinar gives an overview and talks in more detail about the conceptual framework and how we came to the TDUS and why things are on there. Second webinar deals with customization, so this last slide that I was talking about. These will be archived very soon. They tell me that the first one is almost done. So check back, watch my Twitter feed. I think maybe there may be some emails going out, but keep your eye on things, and you can have those archives available whenever they are up. Okay, so as Stephanie said, this survey comes with a manual. It comes with a guide. So we didn't just write the survey, but we wrote a guide to kind of provide more detail in how this is used, how you go about administering this survey, and so on. This guide contains a lot more detail than than you would have if you just picked up a survey. We think it's necessary to read this guide in order to get the maximum out of your survey. It offers more detail about the things that we're talking about in these webinars. So it talks about the conceptual framework. There's a section that goes through and reviews the research that supports this conceptual framework. It lists all the survey items. The guide actually has the surveys in it also, but it identifies which items go to which scales. And so you have a list of those. You have tables of those. It talks about the customization that I just mentioned. The guide also talks about the things that we're going to talk about today. So administration in terms of recipients, time frame, promotion and response rate, and analyses that we're going to talk about today. So so you can read that in the guide. Today you get the pleasure of us offering our stunningly on-point insights about it, and hopefully these two things together will help you understand what needs to be going on with the teacher data use survey. I'll remind you again, and if you joined late, the link to this, I believe, is in the chat box. It's kind of an untenable link to copy, you know, because it's long. So so don't write it down. Just look for it in the chat box there. So let's talk a little bit about survey administration. Now, before you even administer the survey, you've got to make a couple of choices. And one of the big ones is whether you're going to administer this survey in paper format or online format. There are pros and cons to each. As you might guess, an online format is a lot easier for many people to deal with. You send out a link, people click on the link, people go through and take the survey online, and they're done. It offers more accuracy in processing data because the data go directly from the online version into the database, and it's easier to process. It's faster to process that. It makes the skip logic easier. We're going to talk about skip logic here in a second, but there are some questions that if you answer a certain way, then you have to go to another part of the survey. And so online survey software makes that easier. On the other hand, if you are going to do online survey software, the first thing you need is online survey software. So you have to have access to that. And as with any software, you also have to have access to the expertise to make that run. These things aren't always totally trivial to do. You know, you got to work these skip logic things in there. We believe that most contexts have those two things. But if not, paper formats might be a good option for you. Paper formats are in a format that everybody knows. Everybody knows how to do paper and pencil. I mean, even the oldest among us remember from way back what a number 2 lead pencil was. It's kind of an odd bit of trivia that you know when you're 6 years old what a number 2 lead pencil is. But that's because we all took paper and pencil assessments. And so people are familiar with that. They're easy to complete. Everybody can do it. There are some people, even still, there are some people that are much more comfortable with paper formats than they are online. The downfall of those is that you have to enter that data. So you get this big stack of data and you put it on somebody's desk and they have to enter it. It's slow sometimes. It can be error prone because human error can come in. So you decide in your own context which you're going to do. We discuss this in the manual. I would think that all things being equal, that you're better off with an online version, but your context really dictates that. I promised you a little bit about skip logic. Skip logic is whenever you give a response to a question that makes it to where you need to ignore some other questions. Yeah, you know, in paper format, it just says, okay, if you did this, then go to question whatever. But there are 3 areas in the TDUS that you need to think about skip logic. One of them is the first question that asks participants if they have access to data. It's possible, so it asks if you have access to this list of data that you've decided on for your school or district. And if somebody says no to every one of those, so I don't have access to all of these forms of data, then they need to skip over all the questions which are asking them about what they do with that data and how frequently they use them and whether they're useful and all that. They don't have access to them. They don't know anything about that. So it sends them straight to question 10, which starts asking them about their attitudes towards data in general. Another area where you need it is questions 6 through 9. Questions 6 through 9 ask about specific forms, about one specific form of data from each of those categories. So question 6 asks about one specific form of state data and goes through 8 actions that teachers can take with state data. Question 7 asks about 8 actions that teachers can take with a specific form of periodic data. 8 is local data, 9 is personal data. At the first of each of these questions, there is an instruction that says, if you said in question 1 that you don't have access to this particular form of data, or you said in question 2 that you don't use this particular form of data, we're going to make you skip over this block. Because if you don't have access to state data, or if you do have access to it and have said, well, I don't use it, then we don't need to be asking you how often you talk with a student about state data and things like that. So the idea behind these 2 sets of skip logic is to make sure that if somebody has told us somewhere in here that they don't have access to forms of data, or if somebody has said, yeah, maybe I might have access to that, but I don't use it, then we don't want to ask you direct questions about it. And this is not just to avoid annoying the participants, but it's also because if they are answering those questions, you get noise, right? I mean, if somebody's talking about how often they talk to a student about state data and they don't have access to it, then that's not a creditable response. So question 15 is a question that asks about collaborative team meetings. And if you mark on that you don't have collaborative team meetings, then you get skipped to question 18. Again, we don't want you answering questions 16 and 17, which ask about what you do in those meetings. Question 18 is actually the final question. So anyway, those are things that you have to worry about before administering. In the manual, we specify 5 steps for administering the survey. And if you can do these 5 things, then you'll be successful. If you can successfully identify your survey recipients, determine the administration time frame, promote the survey, administer the survey, and while the survey is being taken, if you can do things to promote high response rates, then you're going to be in pretty good shape. So we are going to talk, we're going to spend a slide on each one of these 5 things and help you understand more about what kind of considerations you may have in doing this. Okay, the first one is identifying survey recipients. As you identify survey recipients, one of the big questions you have is, are you going to do all 3 versions? There are situations where somebody may choose not to survey their administrators or their instructional support staff. There are a lot of different situations where that might happen, but one of them is noted here. If you're in a smaller context, surveying, there may only be a handful of instructional coaches, and so you may run into anonymity issues. Still, surveying, if you can give all 3 of these, it's a good thing because it does give the most comprehensive view of data use. Similar considerations come up when you're thinking about, do I sample my population or not? On one hand, if you sample your population, you do sometimes have anonymity concerns. But it's something you might want to do if for some reason cost is an issue. Let's say you're in a gigantic school or district and you have to give paper and pencil. There are a lot of resources that go into paper and pencil, and so for that reason you might want to do a sample rather than survey the whole population. In general, you want to give this to as many people as you can, because what you really want to avoid is some sort of sample bias, where your data is unusually biased towards people who are like really into data, or people that just really hate data, or whatever. So the more people you can get involved with this, the better chances you have of avoiding that kind of bias. The second thing that we consider in administering the TDUS is determining the time frame. You got to figure out when you are going to give this, you want to, in doing so, first thing you want to do is consider schedules. Give this at a time when your teachers can actually handle it, right? I mean, if you do it like right after testing, if you do it right before vacations, if you do it along with everything else that is hitting all at once, then they're going to have trouble with it. You're going to overburden them. They might be more negative about the survey, this or any other survey, so you need to worry about that. Along those lines, you can think about how can I do this more efficiently with other schedules. You know, can I put it in with some other surveys that we already do? That's a possibility. Or maybe you look at it and you're like, no, I don't want this to have anything to do with the staffing survey we do or the school climate survey or whatever. I want this to be separate. So that's a consideration that you can do. One of the big things that I would like to see more schools and districts do is consider their long-term plans for data use. I did a study with Jo Beth Jimerson where we examined district long-term plans, and they almost never contain anything to do with data use or professional learning for data use. Data use is kind of off to the side, and I would like to see this more, data use, more a part of these long-term plans. You know, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to know it when we see it, those sorts of things. And this survey is a really good way to start putting that in there. So you want to consider your long-term plans. You know, what does this look like in terms of our overall vision? And the sub-bullet here, are we going to measure change over time with data use? If that's the case, then you want to give it at the same time of year, every year. So our third point that we want to consider is how you're going to promote the survey. Now, along the lines of what I was saying before, I think there is plenty of room for schools and districts to be more proactive, to be clearer, and be more aggressive in identifying what we're doing and why we're doing it. And particularly, this is true about data use. I think schools and districts and leaders miss a lot of opportunities to say what we are about in terms of using data, what it's going to tell us, how we want to do it, why we want to do it, those sorts of things. And so if you're giving this survey, it's a really good excuse to be able to say these things, right? Specific to the survey, you want to tell people why you're doing this, right? So you want to say, we're giving this survey, it'll measure this, it relates to our district goals, school or district goals in this way. We're using it to help you in these ways, where you will see this sort of thing come out of it. And here is how it's going to make your life better. Here's the deal. Many of you have been teachers before, and you know that you get like 15 million surveys. And one of the things that happens to teachers is that they get asked things and then nothing happens because of that. This is an opportunity for you to let your educators know that their voice is important, that you're listening, right? As one of my graduate students told a superintendent once, they said, well, you know, you do this, you're whacking a hornet's nest, and you want them to know that you're paying attention. And so you want to include, as you're promoting this survey, you want to include these things. Here's the last thing you want to have happen. You do not want somebody sitting down to take this survey and turning to the person next to him going, I don't know why I'm doing this. That's the last thing you want to have happen. Along with this in your messaging, you want to include the logistics. Tell them the dates and deadlines. Tell them that their responses are going to be well taken care of. We've got a couple of things here about anonymity and confidentiality. You have to be careful how you use those words. That, as it notes here, it's anonymous if you can't identify their responses at all. So like a paper version with no other marks on it other than these questions, or just a blind link to this survey for an online version. It's confidential if you could identify them, but only a few select handlers are going to be able to be dealing with these data. And if it is confidential instead of anonymous, you want to tell them nobody's going to look at your response, because the thing that we've found in our research that worries teachers the most is, well, if I answer honestly about my principal, even in good faith, I don't want this to come back on me. And so you need to assure them that this is going to be okay. The next thing that we do is we consider how we're going to administer the survey. And so in the manual, we discuss some nuts and bolts that you need to make sure you handle. Send out an invitation to people to take this survey. You know, if you're doing it online, this is in an email and it contains a link. You can send out an online invitation for a paper survey also. This invitation lists a lot of the things that we talked about earlier. It tells them why we're doing it. It tells the dates, how it's going to happen. But you want to remind people to take the survey also beyond that. So you send out your initial email, and then you want to pester them a little bit. You know, give them a little bit of time, but get back with them and say, hey, if you haven't done this yet, it's really important. You know, we need you to do this because it's going to help you and help us in these ways. You know, here's a copy of the survey, or here's your link again, those sorts of things. We have found it helpful in our research, and I think most districts and schools would also, if you've got contact information for somebody who can answer questions, because there's always something that happened. You know, I lost my copy, or my link doesn't work, or something. And it's helpful to have somebody who can take care of that, or even just answer questions. I get a lot of questions when we're doing research with somebody, you know, one or two teachers are sometimes very suspicious about what's going on, and it's good to be able to talk to them and say, no, this is cool, you know, for one reason or another. Finally, we're going to talk about promoting response rate. This is kind of the fun part for me, is promoting response rate. And, you know, as I noted before, high response rate is important because you get more representativeness. This stuff that we talked about up to this point, all of those things promote high response rates because they give people details and they create good faith. But here's another one that we've learned. Yes, you want to talk to the teachers about doing this, but you got to get the principals involved, right? They're the boss. And so, you know, if my boss says, hey, I'd really like you to do this, then I'm more likely to do it. Certainly, you don't want any situation where teachers are forced to do this. But if they hear that the principal thinks this is important, that the principal is on board with it, and the principal would like them to do this, they are more likely to do this survey. One of the things that we've seen be successful is creating time to complete the survey. So, you know, maybe this happens. We've had some districts that like to do this survey so that the survey window covers a professional development day or some day when they're having meetings. And they have a lot of success with saying, okay, early release day, the kids get out at 1, teachers meet in our room at 1:30, and we're going to give them 15 minutes to complete this survey. You know, we're going to get on the intercom, we're going to say, hey, everybody please take 15 minutes to complete this survey, and you get a better response rate that way. Other ideas include incentives. You can target the individual. I'm not as positive about that as a lot of people are because I haven't seen it work as well as some other incentive things. It certainly helps, but you know, so maybe you can give them a $5 Starbucks gift card or something if they complete the survey. In a big district, that becomes hugely expensive. And often the individual incentives aren't enough to make somebody go, oh, I want to do this, where they wouldn't have otherwise. That said, people have had success with this, so don't sleep on it. One that I'm more excited about, that I've had more success with, is targeting groups, you know, like a school or a particular team or a particular grade level. And one example, we did a survey in a district where we were working closely with a district administrator who really knew a lot. I mean, this district administrator was really sharp. And we were talking about how can we get principals interested in having their teachers complete this. And our district administrator said, well, let's monitor response levels at each school, and the higher rate you get, the more boxes of copy paper you get. And so this administrator actually said, we'll give out copy paper because the quote was, this time of year, this was like in February, so this time of year copy paper is like cigarettes in prison. and it was a fantastic incentive. It was something the schools needed. And so this district administrator knew right where to tap to provide benefit for everybody. So those are the administration issues. Some of you may have been typing in questions and answers as we've gone along, but we'll take a couple of minutes here to answer questions. Jennifer, I think you may have had some of these. If somebody has been typing them in, Jennifer will know about it. And so, Jennifer, I'll let you collect them and read whichever ones you want there.
Okay. The first question is, which is better, to give the survey in the spring or fall? And then also, along the same lines, how often should I send a reminder email to those that I have distributed the survey to?
Spring or fall? Yes, is my answer. Spring is good. Fall is good. It depends. You want to pick a time which is going to be not only logistically useful, but also a time that kind of gets at things that you want to know. And so if you wanted to do like a pre-post in your school year, you'd give both spring and fall, both fall and spring, I guess. My sense is, I guess if I had to pick between spring and fall, my answer is it depends on the context, and you need to decide that. If I had to pick between those two things, I might do spring because people have much of a school year under their belt, and they might know a little more about what they're doing with their most recent initiatives. But my best answer is know your context and do it best. Do it whenever you see it as best. The next question was about reminder emails. Is that right, Jennifer?
Yes. How often should I send reminder emails?
You know, I would think, so I can imagine like a week and a half on a survey window here. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to do like a 10-day survey window, but that has seemed to work well for us in the past. If you did a 10-day survey window, you know, you started on Monday, I'd probably send reminders on Wednesday and Friday, and then one more the day that it ends. You don't want to overburden people, but you do want to keep on them. And just recognize that your distribution of responses will be almost bimodal, meaning that you'll get a lot of people who do it at the first, and you get a lot of people who do it right at the end, and it kind of falls off in the middle. I have no evidence to support this, but I wonder if it doesn't matter how long your survey window is, that you're going to get that no matter what. Anyway, that's what I think. Any other questions? Or Stephanie, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
You know, the only thing that I'll add to the first question about spring or fall is also to consider when the data will be available to inform planning and decision making. So it could be that the administration in fall, there might not be any time to use that data to actually plan additional professional learning during the school year, perhaps the next school year. In spring, you might have the opportunity to have those data available during strategic planning meetings and time to provide professional learning before teachers are back in school to launch a data use initiative for the coming year. So I think just being mindful of when you want the data available for an opportunity to really inform the decision making. So you're taking action based on data and being mindful of that.
Okay, we have another question, and it says, which of these analyses have you found to be typically the most helpful?
You know, on analyses, I'm going to put that question off until after the next few slides. If the person who has that question still has it after we do the slides, then by all means ask it, but you may get it answered during these next few slides. So I'll put you off just a little bit.
Okay, and then one more. If using the survey for the entire district, is there any good way to collect data by school or region while keeping anonymity?
Anonymity? Steph, I don't, what do you see? I don't immediately see a way to do it while preserving anonymity. I can think of ways to do it. In fact, I have done it, preserving confidentiality. But I don't know about anonymity. What do you think, Steph?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that's a hard one.
You know, one of the things we talk about in the guide is whether you want to put demographic information on there. The TDUS deliberately does not have demographic information on there, but you can include any number of demographic indicators. You know, you could ask them what school they're from. You could ask them how long they've been in teaching. You know, things like that. The problem is that when you ask those, then you start whittling away at anonymity. You know, you ask enough of those, and you say, oh, okay, somebody who's in this school, they teach this subject, they've been teaching for this long, and you know, now you've really boiled it down to a small group of people who it could be. Again, if you're doing it right, then you're not even looking at individual responses, and so that doesn't matter. But you want people to be comfortable with that. So maybe, you know, to that question, some version of anonymity can be preserved by asking demographic questions. My recommendation might be to, if you want to be able to track by school, which I think is an important piece of knowledge, that you be upfront about it. You say, we are going to do this by school, but trust me, we're not going to look at your individual stuff. You know, we are going to be the only ones that handle this. Do everything you can to put them at ease about that.
I think another thing, when you use the online software, you have a choice to send out a general link that everybody receives and clicks on, and so that way when they submit the survey, you don't know who you're getting it from, or a unique link that goes to each person for whom you have an email address. So that makes a difference too as to whether or not how you administer the survey is also protecting that anonymity. So if you're using a general link and you have one demographic question that's about school, it's you know, you're taking greater steps to help protect that as opposed to individual links to each person. The trade-off there is with the individual link, you can track, you can target who's responding and who's not, so you know who to follow up with to help increase that response rate. You're not doing it with the general link. You're sending out reminders globally. You know, thank you for those who have completed. You can disregard this reminder for those of you who haven't. So something to keep in mind too is how you're actually administering it and how that relates to protecting anonymity as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll add one quick thing, and then we'll get to the analyses here. That people like Stephanie and me, and those of you who are third-party people, you know, researchers or support organizations or whatever, we have a bit of an advantage in that we kind of come with confidentiality. I mean, not personally, of course, but nobody should think that. But you know, it's easier if Stephanie or I say, well, we're a third-party organization. You know, we are going to handle the data and then get it back in aggregate to your district. And that's a little different story if you're a district person. You know, a district person, you're like, no, really, we're going to take good care of your data. And we understand that you have 23 years of history in this district, but trust me. And so you have to do, you really have to do your due diligence and really worry about that if you're a district person. So anyway, let's thank you for those questions. Those are excellent. Let's move on to the next section, which is how you're going to analyze these survey responses. You know, anybody can give a survey. That's the easy part, and that's kind of the fun part. But the real fun part is whenever you get these data back and you get to look at them and say, what do these tell us? And so let me go through just a few basic things that you might want to do with these survey data. I can tell you that this analysis, it's funny, I'm a data guy, I'm a stat geek, I'm a former junior high math teacher, and this was the hardest part of the manual to write because there are so many different things that you could do with this. With these analyses. We're going to go through some basic ones here just to make sure that you get those bases covered. You need to compute scale means for these things. So the TDUS, as you'll see in the manual, as you might have heard on earlier webinars, the TDUS is made up of a bunch of individual items that get summed up into scales. And what you want to do is you want to add those responses and average them. And you want to do that for each respondent. So everybody, you know, we ask, I think, 5 or 6 questions on computer data systems. and maybe they average a 3.12 across those on a 1 to 4 scale. You can then parse those by different groups or see what those tell you. Also, if you can, if you have the chops there, you want to verify reliabilities. We piloted this survey in Metro Nashville Public Schools, and this survey is actually built on a former one that also has some reliabilities. And so you've got some benchmarks to go by about how the reliabilities for these scales should act. We like to see the scale reliabilities above 0.8. I'll tell you, in my office, I like to see them above 0.9 if we can at all. But if yours are lower, then you may begin to worry. If yours are lower than 0.8, like if they're down in the 0.6 range or maybe even 0.7, then you may want to worry if they're really measuring what you want them to measure. Descriptive analyses. You can go so far with this survey with descriptive analyses. Means, standard deviations for means. The confidence intervals are always good. You might, as we'll look at here, there are some individual items that you might want to look at. So basic statistical analyses will go a long way here. The message on this slide is that you can get a lot of knowledge out of this stuff with some basic arithmetic and some reliabilities. There are a number of comparisons that you want to look at. You want to know how one group thinks about this in comparison to another group. We've got 3 different types of versions of this survey, and so those 3 roles by themselves are important comparisons. We're going to look at that in the next few slides, but I want to issue you one caution. It's very tempting to say, oh, I know of this other district that gave the TDUS. Let's compare our results to them. That could be a positive thing. If you give it at the same time another district does or so on, then you could do that, but be careful about that. Their context is not the same as yours. It actually might have been given another time. If you look on the web and find somebody that gave it and published their results, benchmarking against them could be a really bad idea. So be careful about comparing with outside sources. Let's look at some of these analyses. Here's an example of something of a results table that you could get from this survey. This one looks at the survey scales, or at some of these survey scales across role. And so you can look at this both vertically and horizontally. We'll start with horizontally. If I look at teachers, I see that they are more positive about how data can effectively be used for pedagogy than they are about their own supports for data use. Almost a half point higher on that. I see that administrators are almost a full point higher in their perception of how data can be used effectively to support pedagogy than they are their computer data systems. I think data could be a really awesome thing to support pedagogy, but I don't have the systems to do it. As I look, so that's looking horizontally. As I look vertically, I see that administrators are very much more positive about data's effectiveness for pedagogy than either teachers or instructional coaches. In fact, with the exception, well, that's also true on their attitudes towards data and what data can do for you. In fact, if you look at those, the teacher responses are often the lowest response, which I look at now. I don't want to make too much of these results, but I'll tell you that another thing I've written someplace is the farther you are from the classroom, the easier data use is, because the teachers are the ones that actually have to implement this. And so we find this in a lot of different times that teachers are not as positive as administrators or support staff. Here's a way to look at this graphically. I'll let you look at that a second. That also gives me an opportunity to get some water. Same data as before, but now you've got in bar graph form. We mentioned demographics earlier. If you were to ask about something like experience, you could present this with various demographics. You could do this by school. You can do it by subject, by a number of different things. Again, with your considerations for anonymity. But again, you could look at this table vertically and horizontally. And aside, this actually came from some actual data that we did one of the surveys that this is based on actually have given it in a number of different research projects, and I'll tell you guys that we've collected these data in a bunch of different contexts, and we have no data anywhere that shows that data use is dependent on age or experience. That's the common thing. Oh, the younger teachers will be better at data use. No, that's none of our data support that, and this table doesn't either. So that's not to do with your own analyses, just kind of an interesting thing I thought I'd throw in. Last thing I want to show you is that you can rank these data on 6 through 9. We ask them about teaching practice, and in my research, I found it really useful to compare these responses for different roles. Here's what I'm talking about. If there are 8 questions that we ask on questions 6 through 9 about what different roles or what teachers do with different forms of data. And if you look down through here, you see that teachers put these actions in a different order than administrators put those actions, and a different order than instructional and support staff put those actions. All 3 of these are asking about teachers, but the different roles will put them in different order. And I just find that really, really interesting. And so that's an example of how you might look at an individual survey question and get some knowledge out of it. So we're bumping up against time here. I'm going to go to questions and answers. Does anybody have anything? We had a question earlier, which I now don't remember, on analyses. Was that one answered, and does anybody else have any different questions?
I have a question here. Any suggestions or recommendations for integrating survey data results with qualitative data? For example, interviews with select teachers or other forms of data, student achievement. Yeah, absolutely. With the qual data, anybody can feel free to either visit my website or email me directly, and I'll send you some reports that we've done where we did this exact thing. Not with the TDUS, because this is new, but with other surveys. And what we like to do is we like to do both. If you've got the wherewithal to do it, do this survey for everybody, but also do your qualitative results. If I had more time, I'd tell you some really interesting stories about how these 2 forms of data either conflicted or gave supporting information or just gave different perspectives. It's much richer if you can also talk to teachers about the sorts of things you're asking them in the survey. So that's a useful thing. Connecting them to student achievement data, I would love to do that. You know what you have to have is you've got to have the teacher linked to the student, and so there goes your anonymity, and you really have to worry about your confidentiality. But that could be a really, really interesting set of questions. You just have to be able to have that link, and that is hard to do, but it's doable. Okay, thank you. Let's see. Many evaluation expectations require specific data to be used. Do you have any thoughts on how the TDUS might help parse or not the relationship between teacher data use and evaluation requirements?
I'm going to ask you to repeat that again, please.
Okay, it says, many evaluations expectations require specific data to be used. Do you have any thoughts about how the TDUS might help parse or not the relationship between teacher data and the evaluation requirements?
You know, my initial response to the, I'm concerned maybe I don't understand the question, but my initial response is that when you customize, if you've got an evaluation plan or an evaluation system that is going to look at different forms of data, then make sure you put that on the TDUS, right? Make sure that you're asking about that, because there are a few things that could happen to you. It's possible that you're evaluating on this form of data and nobody's using it. Or you might find out that you're evaluating on this form of data and people find it really useful or not useful, or another form more useful. So I would be all about linking those two together if we could. Stephanie, I'll invite you to comment on that or any of the other questions, and if you want to take us into the next portion, you're welcome to.
Okay, I don't think, for time's sake, I don't have anything to add at this time. But we do encourage everyone, if we didn't answer your questions today, to please contact us. We'll show you a slide where you know where to find us, and we would love to hear from you. And some of the questions, like Jillian, your question about that relationship between teacher data use and evaluation requirements might be better for a discussion or a dialogue. We can find out a little bit more about the specific context and evaluation requirements that you experience probably with your dissertation work. All right, so next Friday, November 4th, we have our 4th webinar. So it will be at 1 o'clock Eastern. You will receive an email reminder if you haven't registered for it with a link to be able to register after this webinar. And I'm excited about this because, we're getting to the so what portion. So you've administered the teacher data use survey, the data are in, so what? And that's why we do what we do, because we want to make a difference through using the findings of the teacher data use survey. So we've been talking about the importance and benefits of communicating those results well. We'll also talk about the reporting tool that we have that I had mentioned earlier, where you can enter data and it generates different graphic displays and also generates a couple of different report types that you can use. We will have Margie Johnson on board with us next Friday. She has been my partner in crime working with in Metro Nashville Public Schools, and she's going to share with you all how she's actually taken the dashboard report and used that for a data dive around planning for the results around data use. So we're excited that she'll be joining us, and it'll be wonderful to have a practitioner perspective as well as just that perspective of somebody who's already been able to use and take steps from the TDUS. All right, so we wouldn't be walking the talk if we didn't ask you to please take a moment at the end of this webinar to provide us your feedback. It is very important to us, especially if there's anything that we can do to make changes before our next webinar next Friday. We'd love to hear from you. So when you close out, you'll see a pop-up and an opportunity to click on a link for a SurveyMonkey survey. So please complete that. You might also see another pop-up for WebEx. That's your choice if you want to do that. We're certainly not asking you to complete that, but we do value your time in providing feedback on today's webinar. So on this last slide, you can find out how to contact us. If you have any questions whatsoever, if we didn't really talk in detail about survey construction and setting up a database, we have a lot of experience with that. So if that's something that you're doing and you want to send us a link to test out, is this functioning properly, we would be happy to do that. So feel free, reach out, ask questions as you come into designing, customizing, and administering the survey. Even if you don't have questions, we'd love to hear how you're using it. So stay in touch, and we look forward to seeing you all this time, actually at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, next Friday, November 4th. Thank you all so much. Have a great weekend and a great day.
Thanks, everybody.